Welcome to another Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram. I'm Director of Product Marketing for our cloud providers in VMware. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Ravindra. So welcome, Ravindra, your first Feature Fridays.
Thank you. Thank you, Guy.
You want to just introduce yourself? Who are you? What do you do at VMware?
Yeah, Ravi Shankar. I'm a staff systems engineer at VCPP, focused mostly on networking and security solutions, sales, and consulting.
Excellent. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So the topic of today is SASE and VMware's kind of solution there in this area for kind of end user compute and edge computing and all of the use cases that come along with requirements for network connectivity. Should we start at the top, Ravindra? Do you want to take us through what SASE is all about?
Okay, very good. So, in a traditional architecture, Guy, what we had a traditional WAN and VPN architecture where we had a lot of users out there and they had internet and private MPLS access. Typically, MPLS access to a centralized data center where all of the traffic from remote workforce would come to a data center across a leased line or an IPsec tunnel. And then you would enforce policies out there and be able to access all of your assets and other SaaS services. So if you look at this picture, you'd actually see a lot of these users coming through the MPLS to the data center and then actually getting back out to SaaS services that are in a multi-cloud environment. And as you can see and imagine, the vast majority of this traffic nowadays, more than 60% of it, is actually headed straight to a SaaS application in a multi-cloud environment. So that's where SD-WAN came into the picture, and that's actually where SASE came in as well. SASE, if you look at it, is essentially a way of bringing networking and security to the cloud and making it relevant and as close to the users as you possibly can. So it involves the ability to understand context, involves the enforcement of security policies, and to understand exactly what is going on with the network, as well as some governance in terms of what you're able to access based on who you are. So that's fundamentally what SASE is all about, is the ability to actually put all of that together in the public internet. In a network, bringing network and security together to be able to use that for most optimal access to a multi-cloud environment.
Yeah, as well as removing all that, complexity in the data center with multiple MPLS connections, managing access controls, and stuff like multi-point VPNs. Yeah, really, really complicated stuff that really what. And again, you're always hairpinning in that scenario. Okay, you're always going in and then going out, or going to some sort of centralized spot to kind of understand your context and what you're allowed to do. And this is it's a SaaS service from VMware. Is that right?
Yes, it is a SaaS service from VMware. We have about 50 POPs. We call them SASE POPs all across the globe. And so there is a presence as close to you as we possibly can from a geographical standpoint. Yes, you can do that. There's also possibilities where you can deploy some of this on-prem, like I'm talking about SD-WAN on-prem or UAG on-prem and stuff like that. So the nice thing about the SASE program here, Guy, is the fact that it's incremental and it's non-disruptive in its insertion, right? So if you might have already existing investments in security products and portfolios that you have, we can actually tap onto that certain services from the SASE portfolio. So it's not like it's an all or nothing scenario.
Right. Yeah, I mean, most of our cloud providers, lots of them have, come from telecommunications and grown cloud provider businesses alongside and already have very large networking presence, but also an awful large amount of providers don't have any capacity to do that and often rely on third parties to configure their networks for them, particularly to customer sites.
All right. So let's take a look at some of the basic pieces with SASE itself, right? And it's got lots and lots of functions out there. I'm just going to go through a few of them, not too much in detail here, but you can see the idea of SASE is actually straightforward. Any user, any location, being able to access any cloud and any application, but through a SASE POP. And what exactly does the SASE POP do, right? So it does things like terminate secure connections, so it guarantees transport security. It also does things like device security and identification, identifies the context. That means we know who you are and what you're trying to access. And also we provide protection to all sorts of data, which means traffic going to a SaaS service on the public internet, as well as to an on-prem data center or to a legacy data center or to the to the internet. So the vast majority of security vulnerabilities are usually associated with accessing the internet. Now, malware and phishing scams and plenty of other things like being able to download malware in attachments and stuff like that, right? So we do have a lot of features that are provided in the SASE POP, things like URL filtering, anti-malware, which is essentially sandboxing. We have zero trust network access. We have the CASB function. We have data loss prevention, firewall as a service, remote browser isolation, and so on. So these are all technologies that are already in place and can actually be put in line with traffic that's headed to the public internet from any device on any in any location. So what I'm trying to say here is the idea of SASE is to be able to not prevent access, to actually allow access, but to be able to understand what you're accessing, when, where, how, and why, and then be able to enforce certain policies that are aligned with corporate priorities. Right? That's the whole idea of SASE. And all of this without compromising any kind of security or access technologies. Right.
So just talk me through how a cloud provider then, because obviously if you're an end customer, this kind of makes 100% sense for some of the mid to large size enterprises. But for our cloud providers who deal with many different customers, from small to medium businesses typically, how would they start offering this as a service to their customers?
Excellent question. So let me just go back and start from there, and we can actually see. Let me go through this security landscape, and through that, I'll actually try to explain what's going on with the and how these services are multi-tenant and how they can be offered by our service providers. Okay, so if you build out this slide, I mean, this is a lot of security features across the board, right? So what happens is SASE, as I said, is a SaaS service from VMware. So a cloud provider signs on through an MSP program and becomes part of the SASE, gets a SASE service through VMware. And what they do is it's all done through the VCO, or the VeloCloud Orchestrator is going to be the fundamental entry point for our cloud providers. And what they do there is they get a partner account, and from the partner account, they can actually create a multiple customer accounts under their partnership account. So that's the multi-tenancy piece. And for each customer, they can select and choose what exactly they want to offer the customer. For instance, if they want to offer just cloud web security as a service, that has got a specific use case, and that's a great entry point for a lot of our cloud providers. So what they would do is they'd say, hey, you've already got work from home users, which is a reality after COVID, and you want to protect your assets or these work from home users from vulnerabilities on the web. So let's insert the cloud web security as part of the SASE service for a specific customer. How would they do that? They would actually just talk to the customer and have a UEM, which is the Unified Endpoint Management, or any other mobile device manager that the customer is already using to manage their work from home assets. And they would download a security SSL certificate, as well as a PAC file, for instance, a proxy access control file. Once those proxy access control files are actually installed on your end devices, all web traffic will now actually go through the cloud web security. And then the provider was going to be able to actually enforce specific policies within the cloud web security for that particular customer. So that's a great entry point for, let's say, a small, medium business that's just trying to protect themselves from access to the web. And of course, after that, you can start layering on other services. You can use the Unified Endpoint Manager from VMware to manage your devices. You could use Workspace ONE, and you can do things like tunnel policies, where you can say specific applications will actually build a TLS tunnel. You can also put in SD-WAN and Carbon Black and all of the other features that come into play with SASE. But all of these are multi-tenant. They can all be they're all designed to be multi-tenant anyway, so every customer can have different policies and different features that have been enabled for them.
So from a service provider perspective, would I be offering this as a managed service, or can I offer it as a self-service to my customers? They log into the Velo Cloud Orchestrator, I think you said.
You could, in most cases, it's a managed service, but self-service options are also available. It depends on how much the customer actually wants to get involved in their own security policies, but they will have access to the VCO. There are different levels of access to the VCO. Usually the first one is the provider access. It's the operator level access, which is operated, maintained, managed by VMware. And below that is the partner level access, where they're able to create multiple customers. And once they create a customer, they can create customer logins within that VCO, where the customer can actually come in there and set their own security policies if they want to. So it can be self-managed. They have visibility and transparency. They have reporting functions. They're able to see exactly what it is that their work from home users are doing and so on. So it's got the go-to-market is both. You can either do it as a managed service or a self-managed service as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that there's huge benefits here in doing this as a managed service. And it's more a question if you've got a larger customer who kind of wants to manage their own stuff, that you might essentially resell this as a self-service offering. Okay, so we've got, like, our service providers classically have got a very large data center footprint today, and I think you've got that box kind of represented on the bottom right hand corner there with things that we have today in the program, like Cloud Director, NSX, object storage services that we provide. How would you recommend a cloud provider kind of start engaging with this? Because a lot of them will do things like up to the operating system on the VM management. Endpoint management is not something they've entered into perhaps before. What's the kind of best starting blocks for them?
Well, again, great question. Let me actually show you how that would work out. We will actually start from here. So we have a lot of these security features, right? The first one, the easiest way to get around it or to start with is a CWS standalone. The CWS stands for Cloud Web Security, right? Where the tenant uses their own MDM. And this is just what I talked about earlier. They download the pack files and then they use the CWS for enforcing policies to protect them against vulnerabilities from the web. So usually the use cases are pretty standard: protect corporate assets from internet phishing scams, drive-by downloads, data loss prevention, and access control. So that's the greatest, that's an easy way to get started, because this, as you can see here, guide, this is totally non-disruptive and it is incremental. So you don't have to have all of the devices done overnight. It can be done, device by device or region by region as well. So that's the first one to get started. The next one is, to that, you can actually add what we call a secure access. I mean, that is the Workspace ONE secure access, where you have Workspace ONE tunnels. And now what you're doing is, in addition to providing protection from the web, you're actually bringing customers in to the SASE POP through a TLS tunnel. Now that's TLS 1.2, right? So there's a Workspace ONE hub that's installed on your managed devices, and the tunnel is created to a TLS, using TLS to a secure access gateway in the SASE POP. Now, there's authentication and authorization that could be potentially from a third-party service like Okta, Ping, or SafePoint, or could be Workspace ONE access if you're going with VMware. Right? So as you can see, what I'm saying here is it's a very open architecture. We support third-party integration as long as they're SAML-based and so on. So it's pretty standards, and there's standards APIs for all of these stuff as well. So in addition to protecting them using Cloud Web Security, now you have the option from the Secure Access Gateway, for instance, to up to 5 IPsec tunnels that can traditionally be terminated in a traditional data center with VCD, or possibly even an AWS EC2 instance or anywhere else. So with this particular option, where you've got cloud web security and you've got secure access, now you've got work from home users being protected from the web, as well as being able to have secure access to a multi-cloud environment up to 5 IPsec tunnels. Right?
Is that per customer instance at number 5, or is that total for the cloud provider?
It is per customer then.
Okay, cool.
We're all talking about just this is on a per customer basis.
Yeah. Okay. So this is really awesome, because I think, you know, a cloud provider who's delivering services in data center today can then easily upsell and have a conversation with a customer who's using those services in data center around, you know, I don't know if it's mobility they require for their sales application, where the data is being stored on the cloud provider site, access to that data and that application in this protected manner with actually very little interruption.
Yes, absolutely. And so if you go further than that, now you can add UEM to that, which is our own unified endpoint management, which is our own mobile device manager. And when you do that, you've got things like tunnel policies that you can actually enforce, which means you can now say only certain types of applications will be tunneled through the secure access gateway using TLS, right? So you have specific tunnel policies. Also with UEM, because you now manage the device, you can mandate things like OS updates, where you can say vulnerable versions of an operating system must be patched prior to accessing corporate devices. That's you can force multi-factor authentication and things like that with OS updates. And like I said, you have tunnel policies and antivirus patches as well that you can actually force. But there's another interesting aspect of this guy that I wanted to mention. It is the identity piece, right? So there's this concept of user context. Once you use Workspace ONE access, which is VMware's authentication scheme or authorization scheme out there, we are able to now transfer identity for that particular user. That means the context of that user to cloud web security, which means when the traffic goes through cloud web security and accessing the internet, I know who you are based on your user context, right? So I can actually enforce relevant policies for specific users while accessing the web. And this could translate to something like, you know, if you belong to the finance group and you're trying to, or you're sending an email with an attachment outside the corporate email address during a quiet period, for instance, that is data loss prevention. So you can do things like that based on user context. And it's a very, very powerful feature that we're working on, is the ability to actually transfer context from one service like secure access to cloud web security.
How do you go about learning the context? Obviously, you know, you got corporates with their own Active Directories and Office 365 directories. Are you pulling in group information there? How are you learning that's in your example, that person is from the finance team?
Yeah, so that's exactly what it is. It's the group information that you find out what person is, and then that information is transferred to the cloud web security as well. So that's the point, is the transfer, sharing of context. And then based on that group ID, I can actually enforce policies specific to that particular group.
Okay. And are we at this point then, when we're now introducing Workspace ONE, are we at the point where we can start publishing SaaS applications as an additional value-added services or custom applications to the tenants' workspace?
Yeah, you can do that if you wanted to, but you could actually go ahead and do that, because of Workspace ONE gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of what you can do on the tenant space. But I was going to go further than Workspace ONE and say, we'll talk about things like Carbon Black, for instance. You can actually install a Carbon Black sensor on all of these endpoint devices, and that gives you behavioral analytics-based security for zero-day attacks. Right, so we understand what is normal on your device, and then everything that's abnormal is flagged and pushed into a Carbon Black cloud, where we use AI ML engines to understand abnormal behavior and then notify the user based on the fact that there is something going on with this particular device, and you can actually go and quarantine the device or take corrective action at that point. So as you can see through these steps, this is an incremental deployment of SASE services, right? So you can just get started very easily, and then you start moving up the stack and you start upselling more and more services from cloud providers.
And how's this put together from a SKU and offering perspective from VMware? There's a lot of different products here. Is this bundled together, or is it a case of the provider would be getting MSP contracts for each separate one?
I don't believe there is a separate contract for each one. SASE, there is no one SKU. Let me put it that way. There are a few different SKUs, but I don't know whether that involves every single product. I don't think has a SKU. There is. I can get back to you on that one, but that is not something that I'm familiar with as of now.
All right, no worries. Because I could see there'd be a lot of a really good synergy with, the cloud providers have the data center, they have the data, they have that data gravity that their tenants need access to that data. Mm-hmm. Providing security and access to that data is often something that's done by perhaps the networking team inside the cloud provider. Right. And how do you kind of think about, and you must have seen this before, but networking has often been kind of historically, it's always been a separate organization to sort of the cloud and the operating system guys. How would you see this or envisage this working with cloud providers who have networking teams today who do in data center and customer access circuits and things like that?
So traditionally, you're right, Guy. There's a lot of people out there that are doing VCPP, partners out there that are doing VCD and NSX, and their footprint is restricted to what they call as a software-defined data center. Now, with the work from home and remote branch office connections, that footprint is being rapidly expanded, or it's sent out or going towards the edge compute as we speak, right? So, and security goes with it. So there is obviously, the security has always been a problem of the weakest link, and the weakest link is typically an unmanaged device at the edge. So even though you might be a networking and security guru and you actually have complete control within the SDDC in terms of what you can do and what you can see in terms of transparency, if you do not protect the edge, you are just as vulnerable, if not more. Right. So I think the trends are shifting. What I see from a security standpoint is that it's become more of a strategic discussion that involves multiple teams. And oftentimes there is a separate security budget as opposed to a network compute or storage budget. So there is a separate way of actually looking at security. And that's where we actually come in with the SASE and SD-WAN. SD-WAN, I think, is a great way to provide remote access. But then that's the other upgrade path that we haven't yet talked about. I talked about cloud web security as an entry point, but those who are already doing SD-WAN can, on all of these SD-WAN devices or gateways, for instance, we actually look at SD-WAN here, and these Vela Cloud gateways that they're currently using for traditional SD-WAN access to the data center are part of what is called as a SASE POP already. So they're the same SD-WAN gateway. It's very easy to upgrade from an existing SD-WAN setup into a SASE POP, where you can actually provide things like secure access and cloud web security, etc. Right? So that's the other upgrade path. You don't necessarily need to go from cloud web security down. You can actually start going from SD-WAN. And as you know, with SD-WAN, there's all sorts of other security features that you get, things like per app service insertion, and you can do things like service insertion within the branch itself, where you can run VMFs such as Palo Alto, Checkpoint, and Fortinet VMFs for IDS, IPS type services at the branch, in addition to the IDS, IPS services at the data center. So there's lots of opportunity in terms of how you can actually start with SASE. If you've already got an SD-WAN, it's a pretty easy start. And if you don't have, CWS is probably a good entry point.
So let me just get straight, because I do know like lots of providers have invested in, the ones that are doing networking have already invested in pretty significant SD-WAN infrastructures already. How would this like interact with, I don't know, like an Alcatel SD-WAN solution, for example?
Okay, so you're talking about third-party SD-WAN, right?
Yeah.
So in the case of a third-party SD-WAN, we will not have an SD-WAN gateway here, right? But we'll have everything else that's part of the SASE story. So you can have a third-party SD-WAN, and what will happen there is that the traffic from the branch going to a data center through a third-party SD-WAN will go past the SASE POP. It won't go through a VMware SASE POP, but all other traffic, which means traffic going to the internet and traffic going to a SaaS application, for instance, could be forced through a SASE POP and enforced. So it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't have to be all VMware. We are very open in terms of the architecture. So that's how it would work. So, you would just not have SD-WAN going through the SASE POP, but you could still use the other components within the SASE POP to provide the security that you need.
Yeah, and I think when you're looking at end-to-end provisioning of a client's, a lot of the in-cabinet stuff that you would do then requires a level of automation to the network that's going to make the connectivity to across the edge to the core to the edge. And typically that can be a fair amount of work, but there's no kind of handoff in terms of automation when you're using a VMware stack in your data center to an Alcatel, for example. If a provider was using our SDDC kind of infrastructure within the data center today, is there any integrations that would kind of smooth that that possibly onboarding or add, move, change, deletes of customer SDDC resources or applications that would be reflected in the Workspace ONE VeloCloud solution?
So the integration within our own SDDC is pretty tight because we have our own SD-WAN edges that have been tightly integrated with VCD as well as NSX. But because SD-WAN is a standard networking with, it's basically open standards, right? So there's really nothing special about integrating VeloCloud. But what we can do that is specific to our SDDC, if you're going to go with VeloCloud, is all the rest of the story that I just talked about. Now, if you're going with a third-party vendor, obviously they have their own SD-WAN story that can be integrated into VCD. Again, the same thing there, where you have edges and hubs that are integrated. So you would not have a common GUI like a VCO or VeloCloud orchestrator that you can use to do all of the other security policies if you're using some third-party vendor. But with VMware, of course, you would have all of that together. So when I talk about SASE here, pretty much every single thing that you see in this blue box is configured, operated, maintained, managed, and reported through the VCO, which is a single pane of glass. You won't get that benefit if you go with the third party. However, it can easily be integrated because it uses the same open standards for all networking.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes a lot of sense, and I think there's significant optimization to be gained by having a solution that offers you that single pane of glass view. Talk me through some of the kind of the automation that can be done from an API perspective that cloud providers, because obviously they like to drive at scale. They like to drive things in a uniform way and lower their operational costs. What's the solution capability like in terms of API configurability?
So that's, again, the VCO or the VeloCloud orchestrator fully supports a northbound API, right? RESTful API. So you can actually automate pretty much anything that you can configure through the GUI directly through an API. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And VCO is the kind of the main interface then for the cloud provider and possibly the tenant?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, VCO is the main GUI. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think one of the things I'd like to understand a little bit more is around Carbon Black, because there's an awfully big requirement at the moment for security. Our cloud providers have been asking for Carbon Black for a long time. It's now in the portfolio. How would that benefit the cloud provider services? What's that going to enable them to offer their customers who are tenants of their SDDC infrastructure as well? Yeah,
so Carbon Black is the primary use case for Carbon Black is zero-day threats, right? And it's behavioral analytics that's based on AI ML. So Carbon Black Cloud is actually it is a very, very we collect a lot of information, a lot of behavioral anomalies across the board that from everybody who's using the Carbon Black. Now, Carbon Black sensor is one that's installed on the device at the work from home device at the edge. But then there's also Carbon Black for workloads that is installed as an agent within the data center itself. Now, the Carbon Black for workload also does exactly the same function as a Carbon Black sensor in terms of being able to understand normal behavior and tag abnormal behaviors. So when it finds something that's abnormal, it sends information to a Carbon Black cloud. And that's where that powerful AI ML engine comes into play. It's not just your specific SDDC. I mean, this information comes from all of the other SDDCs out there that are using Carbon Black. And so if there is an attack that's going on someplace else and we detect there's something abnormal and we detect the same abnormality in a different SDDC, we know exactly what's going on. That's how you totally benefit from a Carbon Black cloud. Right, it's mostly a zero-day attack, because oftentimes with IDS and IPS there is a gap, because what happens is you've got to understand or know the attack vector before you can identify it, and that's fundamentally the issue. So if you don't know about it, if it's a brand new attack, you wouldn't be able to catch that with IDS IPS, and that's where the Carbon Black and things like NTA, which is network traffic analysis, network detection and response. These are the newer technologies within NSX and Carbon Black that help you with that.
Yeah. So IDS IPS is more signature based, whereas Carbon Black sounds like it's before the fact rather than after the fact.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is cool. So the totality of this solution, I mean, it's massive, right? I mean, there's very clearly a lot a service provider could offer here and a lot they could monetize. I think fundamentally, it's a great solution to upsell. If you've got customers who are accessing their data center, in your data center, and if you're doing app modernization projects for that customer, for example, obviously then access to the application becomes a critical thing, no matter where that application is running. So let's also talk through perhaps how we got our stuff in the SDDC. We also got, commercial hyperscale clouds here. If a customer was doing some app modernization, putting his application in Kubernetes, wanted to run it in AWS because of Lambda or some specific reason, that can still be a part of this secure access controlled SD-WAN function with the SD-WAN edge. Is that right? In hyperscale?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So the SD-WAN edge gives you access to, or is basically available in the AWS marketplace, just as you can actually buy it as in Azure and GCP and Oracle Cloud as well. So what happens there is if you got an EC2 instance that's native and you're running EKS, which is some Kubernetes service, and you're running some service out there, you can protect, or you can have protected access to that service through the SD-WAN edge from all of your work from home or remote applications. And that connection that you see there in red is essentially a VCMP tunnel, which is a VeloCloud multi-path protocol based on IPsec. So it is a secure connection that's automatically built for you. So technically, if you imagine it, look at EC2 instance as yet another branch office, and SD-WAN provides you seamless, secure, and on-demand connectivity between any 2 points in the network. That's fundamentally how it works. And it's secure access. So that fundamentally means that you can actually have a multi-cloud that is connected through a secure channel like SD-WAN. So yes, you will provide secure access. Now, if you're going to be able to access those applications, let's say from Workspace ONE, or using Workspace ONE tunnel, then I know who you are as well based on the identity, and you can do authentication and authorization. So I can actually see are you who you say you are, and then I can also answer the question, are you allowed to do or access this particular application that you're asking for access to, and only then allow you access through the SD-WAN gateway onto the AWS or the particular Kubernetes application. So you definitely have visibility in terms of who's accessing it, and all of the transparency that comes with the security process that's enabled by SASE.
Yeah, I kind of see this as it's almost, well, it is full circle, right? You can have your data center infrastructure today running vSphere, VCD, NSX, and all the SDDC componentry, the customer wants to modernize some of his workloads and applications into new new applications which are using new architectures and suitable for mobility, perhaps, i.e. getting them out of that SDDC infrastructure and putting them into a global hyperscaler. So they've got global presence, global load balancing, all those good things. But then also as a service provider, offering the Workspace ONE capability to publish the application back to the customer base users, and then providing them access through the SD-WAN and VeloCloud to that application securely and authenticated and everything else. And I'm guessing that we've got all of the kind of usual SD-WAN features around traffic identification and shaping and prioritization. Is that something else that would also feature into the SD-WAN function?
Yes, absolutely. We've got all of those functions, essentially the per application traffic steering. We have all of the reporting capabilities. We even have things like service insertion if you're coming from a branch. We have things like segmentation. That's essentially the ability to isolate networks. For instance, if you're operating a retail space and you want, based on PCI compliance or regulatory compliance requirements, you want to be able to separate and completely isolate all credit card transaction traffic across a separate network. That's the typical use case for something like segmentation at the branch office. So complete and total isolation. You can also have service insertion at the branch office where you actually run specific VMFs, and you can, depending on the application, for instance, if you're looking at Office 365, and if it's an email traffic that's coming in, and the attachments could potentially be scanned by a local VMF or a virtual network function, such as Palo Alto or Checkpoint, that runs on the SD-WAN edge inside the branch office itself. So that's what we call a service insertion here.
Yeah.
We've got also other intelligence like ENI, which is edge network intelligence, that helps you with troubleshooting and so on. So there's a lot of functions that are available from the SD-WAN that obviously come in, and you can use all of that as part of the SASE core.
That's brilliant. I think this is a really attractive solution for, like I said, cloud providers who are offering SDDC services today, private cloud services today, but also those who are looking at helping customers with modernization to deliver the app securely into an area where, or into an infrastructure that can be securely accessed, but also then providing the performance and the guarantees on the application performance to the consumers, whether that's on mobile, laptops, or wherever. Yeah.
Exactly.
Nice.
And one more thing I wanted to mention to you here, Guy, is this thing with per app service insertion. So let's say a customer already has an investment in Zscaler, for instance, or Zscaler Private Access, or they're using Zscaler instead of Cloud Web Security, and they've already got a relationship with that. We can actually integrate Zscaler with SASE as well, because the SD-WAN gateway, we can build an IPsec tunnel to this Zscaler service, and then certain types of application will be forced through that IPsec tunnel across the Zscaler service. So service insertion, whether it is in the branch or even a cloud-based service insertion for security from third-party vendors, is also possible with SASE. So that's why I said it's a very highly open architecture that you can pretty much integrate what we want already, as long as they're standards-based, and you can use what you need to from VMware.
Okay, well, I think this has been very, very useful for me. I certainly didn't know there was quite so much included in the portfolio. I knew them as discrete things, and it's really nice to see them all tied together here in one concise service use case, which has many, many different upsell opportunities for cloud providers. Ravindra, so thank you so much for walking us through this. It was really nice to see the stages as well, because looking at this as the end state potentially is quite overwhelming. There's a lot of stuff here. There's probably quite a steep learning curve, I imagine. Any advice for cloud providers on how to get started? We've gone through the stages, but how should they get started in terms of perhaps looking at some education?
I think we're running several workshops, Guy. I think SASE, there's so many workshops out there. There's plenty of information on VMware SASE. I can, along with this presentation, I'm just probably going to send you the links to those. There's online training, but there's quite a few webinars, and SASE is a big push at VMware Explorer. So if anyone's interested, there's a lot of SASE sessions out there. So I think those are the best
Great.
ways to get started. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. VM Explore. Everyone attend VM Explore.
Yes.
Okay, Ravindra, thank you very much today. Really appreciate your time, and thank you for introducing the SASE portfolio to us.
Thank you very much, and you have a great day.
Cheers.